Hey, beautiful guys. So thank you for joining me. I just said a really strange thing before I started recording. I said that I think this talk is for myself. I can't think of any subject that has plagued me more in my life than whether this is all actually outplaying in some sort of a purposeful pattern, or what we like to call fate, and if there is some form of destiny. And these are some of the oldest questions asked by man, and we know this for a fact. It shows up right in the earliest of antiquity. It shows up in our fascination with divination. Now, to divinate or divination is one of the most ancient forms of spiritual practice, which to these days has become tarot and I Ching, but essentially, and this is a very big part of the subject, it's almost eerily exciting. The reason divination, or trying to assess what the universe wants, is one of the oldest forms of spirituality, is because the ancients figured out very, very quickly that there was indeed some sort of intelligence to how this pattern outplayed. Now, of course, we haven't established that yet. We're going to have that conversation. But what divination was the average human being who I believe was far closer. I know this is a very strange statement. We have evolved in many ways, but we were far closer to the centrifugal divine force of nature. And I don't mean like that we lived in the bush. I meant that we could sense that primordial instinct far stronger than we do today. And there is a very, very special reason for that. It is a form of evolution. And not to leave you hanging by what I mean by that is, if you look at an animal, right? An animal acts upon pure instinct. And therefore one could say that an animal never actually gets in its way of its own destiny. An animal, and all animals combined, allow themselves to outplay in this perfect purpose pattern, which is quite beautiful to observe. But it has been postulated by many great philosophers that at a certain stage, species or creatures or planets get to a point where they start to create a specific being or species that will move beyond instinct and almost have a mind to consider itself, or have a mind to consider why the laws and the purpose patterns and the great evolution that's unfolding is there in the first place. So we haven't really learned anything. What we have learned is that man has, for the most part, for 10,000 years, I believe that we have been here for about 500,000 as a civilized. That's my personal perspective from what I see on the Akashic, but this is not an esoteric talk. And man has been trying to interpret what it is that the divine wills. That's basically what divination is. Man's realization that there is a greater purpose or divine intelligence driving all things, and therefore the logical mind would go, well, if one came to an intersection, now this is just a very simplistic way of looking at it, but if one came to an intersection and believing that there is a higher purpose of unfoldment, of evolution, of expansion, a great plan in action, man began to ask himself, shall I go left or shall I go right? And in deep reverence of God, whichever that word might be, because as we'll expand upon, the word itself needs to grow for you as you do, man began to wonder if I could interpret this. If I put myself in a sincere state and I asked, not my will, but thy will be done, as the great saint used to pray. So that's divination. But of course, that was the assumption that there was a great purpose pattern. And what we have here sitting in 2023 and 24 and 25 unfolding as this great new astrological cycle opens is we have incredible tools. And what we have is we have, first of all, history. Now that sounds very strange, but you know, the one thing that's never occurred to man is that history is a sacred scripture. It's so funny how when we look back at things, we can believe that certain writings are scriptures, but history is literally the recording of the pattern unfolding of mankind. So we have history, we have archaeology, we have anthropology, we have all of these incredible subjects, and let's call them tools. And what's really interesting about these tools is they seem to be pointing, zoology, biology, genetics, epigenetics, they seem to be pointing towards the same thing, that there is definitely some form of evolutionary expansion taking place. Now, that word evolution, you've got to be very careful of, because it has a lot of red flags for the average person, just like the word God. But there is no doubt that the levels of complexity and the levels of intelligence and that the levels of perfection of biological mechanisms or creatures of life are expanding just since we are able to track them, and that they're ever evolving and ever changing. So I want you to take your little idea of evolution and a monkey, and we're not talking about that. We're not trying to become deeply embedded in science. We just want to push that aside a bit and just go, you know what, it's pretty clear that everything seems to be extremely intelligent. People call it intelligent design. Some people become so obsessed in the brain, in other words, we become hijacked by thought alone, that we're trying to explain the whole universe through science. And this is where this might kind of be going in your mind. What on earth does any of this have to do whether I have free will or not? Well, we need to kind of historically, and I usually glaze over when someone says that, it excites me. What actually happened is we need to understand that for as far as we know, 10,000 years from ancient Egypt, which expanded into the Kemetics, the Hermetics, who produced modern medicine, chemistry, astrology, astronomy, and all expanded from those Alexandria and all those great libraries that were destroyed. And what was amazing about what originally happened, and most people don't realize this, is that they also believed, like today, that there were inexplicable, unstoppable, immutable laws taking place in the universe. The only difference is we only believe that that is true for physical things nowadays. Now, that sounds quite complicated. What I'm trying to explain is today we do believe that if you run into a wall, you'll break your nose. If you do certain things with water, it will never change what happens. There are these incredible mechanistic laws to the universe that once we begin to understand them, we realize they are immutable. And the deeper we get into the physical laws, the more we sit mind blown by why they are there in the first place. But we do know that they're not breakable. But what has changed in the last few thousand years, where we have supposedly got so intelligent, is that we split off science from religion. And how this happened is, for instance, if you go and study what is, for instance, if you go and look at the history of chemistry, you will see something really interesting, that it was called alchemy. And it was the search to understand why things were the way they were in the spirit of God. In other words, they were looking at molecules, but there was always this belief that the unseen or the non-physical universe was half of things. And that's really not hard to believe. Nearly every ancient painting you look at, right, they show the spirit realm, they show the physical realm. These are really not unusual things. But if you can just sit with me for another 2 or 3 minutes before your mind checks out, it will dawn on you what this has to do with if you've got free will. So basically, mankind believed that there was a whole lot of spiritual laws and a whole lot of physical laws. And if you could just stay tapped into them, you could become like a magician. You would be a sage or a mage or a great sorcerer, because you would understand not how to bend the laws, because no one can do that, but how to ride the forces. And so where things get interesting is if the proof of this would be that alchemy then became chemistry and the other part dropped away. Nowadays, we don't believe that there's any magical reason for the molecules. Like quantum physics, even though the greatest quantum physicians in the world have recognized, including, I can't think of his name, I don't plan my talks, Brom, in the 50s, one of the godfathers of quantum physics, said that there's a spooky spiritual weirdness to the basement of reality. But that's about as close as we come. And what we have now is we have people looking at the physical laws of a molecule. Like, no, it's like this, it's like, and there's obviously no spirit in that. But this goes so deep. Astrology was exactly the same thing. Astrology and astronomy were a single subject. Now, this is pretty important because we're talking about free will, fate. Do I actually have any say in what's going to happen to me? So quite literally, not only did they look at the position of the planets, and not only did they recognize that the gravity and all these incredible new laws they were discovering about God. To them, it was never like, oh, it's got nothing to do with God. They were the same thing. Wow, we seem to have found one of his laws, but we don't know why. I mean, this is so exciting. And then astronomy and astrology began to split. And now what do we have? We have people that we really laugh at because they are looking at the forces of the stars upon people, even though the moon literally affects, I live on the ocean. The moon affects nearly everything that happens in my neighborhood, right? And if you guys want to follow someone like, I mean, he's trying to give you a very random example, Bruce Lipton. Go check out Bruce Lipton's work. Now, do you know who he is? Most of you, that's why I'm picking him, because I'm into the very ancient stuff. He's a modern dude. He's a biologist. He's a modern biologist, and he can track. He shows, he's got books and videos on how the magnetic resonance of the planets are affecting your cell. Get what I'm saying? So these guys were on the right track. But why are we taking such detail to do this? So astronomy and astrology, just like we saw in chemistry, was the exact same thing. People would be like, oh, wow, there's Jupiter, and Jupiter appears to have this psychic energy, and they began to try and interpret it. And we had, I feel, hundreds and thousands of years to feel what these cycles and forces and things were like on us. And the best thing is, it's not just my own opinion regarding this. If you look into Hinduism or if you look into Eastern astrology, you discover the most exciting things, like I think they're called the Yudras, or could be so far off here. But astrology shows us that entire worlds are broken and down every 200 and something thousand years. The in-breath and out-breath of Kali, as worlds are produced and pulled back as they evolve and grow. This is written into Hinduism. And we can even track it. So I'm not trying to prove astrology. I'm just trying to prove how dangerous the split of what's happened in our mind is and why we can't understand destiny. And basically what happened is they split the two. And today we laugh at people who try and interpret the forces of the planets, even though we are actually technically the first generation not to believe it. First generation. I mean, Shakespeare. It's all over, right? It's in all the ancient, just the saying, it's written in the stars. There's a great scene in a Shakespearean poem. I wouldn't know where from exactly, but it was Romeo and Juliet, where she screams, I think, stars, I defy you, as though something is predestined, as though something is written in the stars. So what we see again is that split. And this split carried on through most things. And if you lost at this stage, this is all I've actually said. Up until recently, we interpreted the unseen forces. In other words, what are the laws that are running my life? What are the patterns, psychically, emotionally, mentally? Like an example would be reincarnation. They would try and interpret, am I coming back? How does my evolution work? Do I keep my own individuality? And up until recently, the fact that there were physical laws and the fact there were unseen laws was so logical. They were one subject for thousands of years, up until even recently, the Gnostics and all these mystery schools. To go and learn the unseen laws, you had to prove your devotion to God. If you want to go study someone like, who is the great mathematician? I can't think of his, Pythagoras. As an example, is his students had to go through 7 years of like silence and tests and all sorts of, this is known facts, you can research this, just to get accepted to hear the mathematical secrets. Do you know why? Because they didn't think there was a difference between knowing how to build an atomic bomb and knowing how your spirit works. To them, it was sacred information. The polarity of God, the physical and the unphysical, or the seen and the unseen, or spirit and body. So where does that leave us today? Well, what basically has happened is we have forgotten that there are unseen laws, which is terrifying, because it leaves us, and this kind of brings us to this very existential moment. It took us 10 minutes to get here. It leaves us terrified that this is all random. We have no idea when we wake up tomorrow morning. We have absolutely no idea why that car might hit us, why we might get ill. We have no idea why life is kind to us sometimes and not to others. And we are grasping the best that we can to try and figure this out. And the two possibilities that we are left with are absolutely exciting and terrifying at the same time. The one is, this is completely random. To me, I remember at a certain age actually thinking this was all random. Like, it's almost incomprehensible that people can think that they're not right now sitting in the middle of intelligence, but we'll get there. So the average person is feeling like they are sitting in a firing range / lottery / absolutely random, like coconut might fall on your head at any second. And that is the state that we are sitting in, with having lost our unseen laws. Or, let me rephrase this, having lost how the universe actually responds to us. And the fact that we are actually constantly interacting with everything around us, and that everything that happens to us is, now I'm not going to say perfect response to our behaviors, right? A lot of things in spirituality are watered down now to make us feel better. Like, what we've done is we've taken all these cosmic laws, the ancient laws that no one disagreed on, and we've whitewashed them. And by the time we're done, we've got The Secret. Just imagine your Porsche, and here it comes, and the really crazy thing is the law of attraction is true. But we've watered things down so much. What we've got with the modern new age is we've got a state of, well, there's even a word for it. It's been added to the dictionaries, omniism. And the average spiritual person is an omniist. And what that means is you have a culmination of all sorts of beliefs to create what it is you perceive spiritually. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I've been an omniist my whole life. But here's the danger. If you allow a person to pick and choose what they're going to believe, which we're going to be like this always, we are sovereign beings, will we choose the disciplined routes or the convenient routes? Now what we've got left is we've got a lot of ancient wisdom that started coming back out in the 1800s through occult teachers, that has been watered down to create what's the new age. And basically, we are in a state where, unless it's about how we can make more money, or about how we can suddenly heal ourselves because we're in deep issue with disease, we're not actually willing to realize that these laws are outplayed every moment of our lives, and that, like magicians, we can learn to ride them excitedly. So what would the first step be? The first step would be to perhaps invite in the fact that there are laws outplaying in your life. Now, no one knows exactly what these laws are. The Hermetics, which are the kind of the traditions I come from, believe that there are a base of 7. But some people believe that there are 12, and some people believe that there are more. And the truth is, and I agree with like the tablets of Thoth and a lot of these ancient teachings, it just depends how you explain them, but essentially they all link into some way. And in some way, some people have called it the law of one. But here's the simplicity of it, right? Because you're probably going to write notes and go and hunt these laws, and I say do it. But I don't want you to get lost on the laws. Here's the simplicity of the conversation, that there is this really beautiful thing unfolding right now. Imagine if I said to you, the Big Bang is happening right now. That sounds ridiculous, but scientifically it's actually true. Entropy, but we don't want to get scientific. Think about it. Whatever exploded, and whether according to like Hinduism, this has happened hundreds of times before, and we're growing each time we create a new universe. That's what the Hindus say. And they have the most ancient sense, in other words, most ancient written teachings. But let's just imagine that we don't believe anything. We've got a bit of science. And we know that this huge bang took place and everything has been morphing and changing. And is it not happening right now? We are amidst the Big Bang right now. And why that's exciting is that you are currently sitting in a pattern. You're part of something so magnificent. And as a lot of the great philosophers said, if you're really honest with yourself and you meditate and you pray, you can feel that it's just out of your grasp to truly know where this is all going. And the average medicine man or the great oracle ladies of Greece who would help people come up to the mountain, and they would ask them, which way should I go? And through their dreams, they would help them to try and divine what it is that God wanted. Now, this used to sound so archaic and childish to me. Now I realize, wow, how deep does my level of devotion for God need to be willing to ask him if he has any input before I actually make this decision. So where this leaves us incredibly is, imagine how much your life would change if you actually decided that nothing is random. Now, if it isn't random, because some people think they believe this, okay? If it isn't random, of course, that changes things absolutely massively. So the biggest question we could possibly ask ourselves as a human being is, either I am fully accountable for absolutely everything, or I'm accountable for nothing. That's something that you need to meditate on. You can't have one or the other. It's taken me 20 years to decide that. And I'm not the only one. I've been influenced by some very interesting people, but think about that. You cannot pick and choose. You're either 100% involved, engaged, part of this purpose pattern, that your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, your plan, your destiny, your fate are all intertwined and outplaying every day. Or you got nothing to do with this and you're just in a shooting gallery full of ducks, like in an old, what are they called? Fun fair. And the reason why we are not willing to decide that the ancients were right and that the laws are quite not obvious, but if you work on yourself and you meditate and you spend time with the laws, like the law of attraction, which we've changed, but I'm using that as an example that we do still have a bit of touch on these laws, one begins to realize that to accept these laws, you would have to do this simple thing. You would have to accept that you are responsible for every bad thing that's ever happened in your life. Now, yeah, we have to be so cautious. I literally want us to pause. Have you ever heard that man essentially turns God into his own image? You know, that a lot of the ancient Hebrew texts and things essentially say that God made us in his image. And a lot of philosophers like Nietzsche argued, yeah, but man's turned it backwards now. And we have essentially turned God into our image. And what that means is we are quite petty in some ways, and we get angry, and so we've decided God must be like that. And what was called cause and effect, as above, so below, so within, so without, these were the ancient teachings, gradually became karma. And karma went from this absolutely perfect way of the universe without any anger, without any opinion, like a parent going, well, if you touch the flame again, it's going to burn your hand. Think about it, what it's like to be a parent. I'm not a parent, but like you know more about where that child is going than that child does. And a lot of the things that you essentially enforce are actually quite emotionally difficult for you. Why? Because you can see how that child just doesn't fully understand, okay? But why would a parent put any of that in place? The only reason would be because either you are going to become someone that becomes fully expressed in the eyes of God, and in other words, he holds space for you to become the thing you didn't even know that you so desired. Or the opposite is, what is it like to become a 30-year-old who was never disciplined, and now you're angry with your parents because you don't know how to make your own bed, you've never had a job. You get what I'm saying? And this is a very strange analogy. But when you look at cosmic law and when you look at karma, you have to drop the new age idea, because the new age idea is going to divorce you from God. It's going to give you this idea of some kind of matrix. That's why this word is becoming so big. And it just responds so coldly to the fact that I do this and this happens, and I do this and this happens. And I want you to consider that the only reason these laws exist is because they are the highest potential version of love that could ever be created in the history of the universe. That's truly what this parenthood of divinity that runs through all things, how it actually operates. Now, that's quite an intense statement, but if you're willing to get rid of, do you know what the average person does with karma? They use it as a way to bring their own hate and pettiness out. Karma has been turned into the modern gangster. It's terrible. I mean, it's actually hysterical as well. I hear some of the things people say in the name of karma. Oh, karma will fucking sort them out, you know. Karma has become this, and it's just a projection of our own inability to understand how beautiful the discipline that we are against our seeming will. This is where do you have free will comes in. How beautiful those disciplines are. And that's why that parent analogy is important. So as we're approaching kind of the closing of what we're talking about here, where that leaves us is if we are willing to accept that, for instance, what has been called karma now, but like in the Egyptian mystery schools, cause and effect, as above, so below, what's within is without, then what we discover is that this is what your life would look like. Your life would either look like someone that is essentially just randomly trying to see what's happening to you, or the other life would be this realization that you are in a self-created world or reality that's giving you opportunities to grow every single day. And even if you get ill, it's by your own hand. And this is why you have to be careful with the subject, because in the man's brain, he'll be like, oh, that man died because he did something wrong. Well, how do you know that? Probably the only I feel enlightened person I've ever met in my life died brutally from cancer when I was in my 20s. I've never met a more enlightened woman. She died brutally. And she joked with me in the last time that we had lunch. Oh, I'm probably trying to clear some of my karma. But she joked with me. My point simply is that we have no idea, and I consider this as like we have no idea how long there is between action and reaction. As the great astrology Ptolemy said, the only fatalism that exists, in other words, the only thing that is absolutely inescapable, when they asked him about whether there's destiny and fate, he said the only fatalism that is impenetrable is the consequences of your actions. But you have no idea exactly how big those cycles turn. In other words, according to Ptolemy, the more enlightened you got, the quicker your life would respond. We call that frequency and vibration today. But it's quite exciting. He was saying that the reason most people can't take responsibility is because they might have done it 2 lifetimes ago. Now, that's a game that's too big for people. I arrived on this planet, I know for a fact, mentally ill. I was 2 or 3 years old, and I remember snot in my nose, standing in a nursery school and thinking, what the fuck is going on here? And I knew something was wrong with me, and that didn't go away. So my point simply is that I've got 2 choices, and I've been left with this choice my whole life. Either I am just absolutely a product of my family's genetics, and it's all of this, by the way, or that this is really part of the choices and the decisions and the thoughts and that I have made. And I've eventually, in my 40s, come to the conclusion that it was all my doing. Because what seemed like impenetrable mental illness, pain, anxiety, I feel that in slowly altering patterns that I was born with, that were already ingrained with me, I feel like they are lifting and changing. So I don't think that I think we've got to be careful, because I mean, basically, if you misunderstood this talk, you would go tell your friend and say, well, that's your fault. That's like, we could go into a shaming space. People cannot, that's why I'm so careful why I don't discuss a subject over 2 minutes. People say to me, you could have said that in 2 minutes. No, because what would have come out is, Nathan says it's all your fault. That's not what I said at all. And it's really important that we have that kind of difference, is that we are amongst a parent that love and whose plan, whose purpose pattern. I mean, if you just look at how small a planet is, and that this creature is, or this being, or whatever it is expanding galaxies wide in a perfect process where we can, thousands of miles away, even measure that it has laws over there as well. The same laws that are outplaying here. We might be a cell within a cell within a cell within a cell. It's just so mind-blowing. So where does that leave us? Well, to me, there is something that exists in every single human being. 2 things: an appetite for, I would just want to say, an appetite. And that appetite could be food, alcohol, sex, power, an appetite to experience our environment. And the second is a longing for God. I have never met someone that doesn't long for God. It can be an atheist while I'm talking to them. They might not tell me, but I can hear in every word they're saying. The majority of alcoholics and drug addicts, and including myself, that I've ever met, were like that because they were searching for God. They so craved that feeling of feeling that union. So what that essentially leaves us is, every single day, we are either outplaying the appetites of man, which just basically means like that we've so forgotten we're in the middle of this massive pattern outplaying. We've lost the excitement of the fact that I have so many lives and I'm so ancient that I don't have to have all the sexual experiences or all the religious experiences. I don't have to try all the drugs. I can literally just focus on whatever is unfolding in this life, going, wow, this life is so perfect for me. I'm an athlete, or I'm a singer. And as a singer, I don't have to worry about, I could have become something else because I'm unfolding a plan of thousands of millions of years. And what would happen in this possibility is I could focus for the first time on the fact that there's two possibilities. There is that I'm following that higher calling to unfold the plan according to the divine essence within my DNA, or I'm following my lower nature. I'm expressing the appetites of man. And why fate is essentially, and destiny is real, is because all things in the universe will eventually reach fruition, or will eventually reach their greatest potential. But some things might do it with so much suffering that the adventure is going to be absolutely massive. I mean, why do we suffer? We suffer when we are outside a purpose pattern. Why do we suffer in school? Well, I mean, we're not saying God created that pattern, but because we're battling in the pattern. We're going, well, there's a certain way things are, and we just can't accept that. Why do we suffer there? Why do we suffer there? Why do we suffer in nature? It's the same thing over and over. And many, including Buddha, spoke about the fact that enlightenment was essentially to get to the point where there was nothing in your environment that conflicted with your nature. In other words, no resistance to the patterns of perfection. Or in other words, you're not creating suffering anymore because you understand that everything around you is just responding to you. So it's such a beautiful conversation, because where it leaves me is I will get there regardless of what I do. But how long do I actually want to sit in the suffering? So many great astrologers and so many great men spoke about the fact that change is so hard that most people will essentially allow the system or the pattern of evolution to get them there eventually. Does it make sense? In other words, even though you don't know what the fuck you're doing, you're going to get there eventually, and it's going to take hundreds of lives. And what these great philosophers were talking about, though, was some people get to the point where, like, I don't want to suffer anymore. Or they start to get the joke. They can't start going, wait a minute, there's a pattern to this whole thing. There's actually laws. I can actually close my eyes and I can ask for guidance. And this is really exciting, because what happens is we realize that one of the greatest premises of astrology, a certain planet might move into your space, and that force will influence you. And 99% of people will respond to that force, and 1% will go, I was expecting you, I'm not doing that again. And that is so inspiring for me. So in other words, you do have free will. It's very unlikely. It's a very, very difficult thing to hear. But what's amazing is, in not having free will, what I mean is this little part of your brain that wants its own mission. And some people go and figure it out, and they become masters. They make entire religions. Sitting under a tree, Buddha or Jesus, or these guys figured it out. They were like, wait a minute, I don't have to do this on these endless cycles for hundreds and thousands of years. And I like the acknowledgement of the fact that the suffering is mine. It empowers me to take responsibility for the fact that, now, you might not think this is powerful. I think I might have done some pretty bad stuff in my past life. And I actually have an idea of kind of what it is. And I'm willing to, I think I'm at the first time in my life willing to start taking responsibility for what was done. I think it had a lot to do with power. And I also love the fact that I'm becoming aware of the fact that the way I respond to my appetites is very important. I mean, reading a book right now, right? Or going to do a meditation just now, or how you're going to treat your sister or your cousin or a stranger just now, completely changes if you realize it fucking matters. It's so silly to say, but think about it. If you just think that it's random and you're going to die just now, if you realize that, and this is why this concept, this new age concept of higher self is a very good one. They're basically trying to explain that there's a part of you that's accumulating this whole thing, and that you are up to one seriously beautiful plan here, and that every little part of this, and so we're using words like tested and everything happens for a reason. Not really true. Everything happens because you're a moron or because you're not a moron. They are a direct response to you. Sometimes the reason it happened is because you're an idiot. Does it make sense? The universe is not actually going, oh, cut your arm off. It's nothing like that. It's got this perfect process of your soul and the universe knowing what it is you want to become and purposely creating these things and responding with you. And I love the responsibility, and I think I'm finally ready for it. And I realize why every great saint that ever existed wrote about discipline and about how discipline, discipline is only a dirty word. I read a poem the other day. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I must write some of the stuff down. So, discipline, there was a single sentence in there, but basically joy is actually birthed from discipline, but that most people don't realize it. But yeah, and happiness is like an elusive little fairy that can hardly ever be found. But if you find happiness dancing with discipline, then joy is birthed. And all that basically means is if we took a bit of responsibility and we took a little bit of discipline, we might actually realize that we are on quite an exciting adventure. And I don't know about you guys, but this life has been quite fucking hard for me. Like, I know that sounds very dramatic. I want to live again. I love the human experience. I've got a lot of perspective because I get to leave my body a lot. So as soon as I leave my body, I can kind of see how important being in a body is. But I tell you, I'm not going to suffer like this again. So I'm at a point in my life right now where I'm so tired of my own shit that I'm trying to make some really big changes. And to be honest with you guys, I'm nervous that I'm even going to get it right. And they're habits and they're things that have been so ingrained in me that I was born with them. And the reason I wanted to speak about the subject is because it's so personal for me. And I've been contemplating this most of my life. And it's time now that I accept the fact that I am not lost in God's eyes and that I will eventually find where I want to go, but that the spark in me is calling to change midstream, as Ptolemy would say. Very few people stop in the middle of their lives and go, I can see where this is going. That's fate. You eat enough, you drink enough, you smoke enough. It's that type of fate. You can't go like, oh, I can see where this is going. You treat people a certain way. Nations behave in certain ways. History shows us the same responses happen every time. So I wish you guys luck in your processes, but I can tell you that my own stubbornness and my own inability to hold myself accountable is driving myself a little bit dilly. But on the other hand, when I have these victories, there's a part of my soul that's kind of so excited by saying, we knew you would take this on. And I hope that something like that happens inside you, because you wouldn't be lost. You wouldn't be damned. You wouldn't be in hell. I just think it's quite exciting that some souls are wanting to step it up and to kind of, in the hundreds of things you are all over the universe, to be one of your own higher selves, because that's what will happen if this version of you starts changing shit from the inside. You will suddenly become one of your higher selves. Yeah.